The sound of boots scraping gravel was the only warning Sarah Hensley received before rough hands slammed her against the weathered planks of the alley wall. The afternoon sun barely reached the narrow gap between the assay office and the mercantile in Tombstone, Arizona territory, leaving the passage cloaked in a dusty half-light that smelled of horse manure and stale beer. Sarah's basket of mending tumbled to the ground, spilling white linens into the dirt as three men formed a wall of tobacco-stained teeth and unwashed leather between her and the street beyond. "Got you now, darling," the tallest one drawled, his breath hot enough to make her turn her face away. A silver badge pinned crookedly to his vest caught what little light filtered down from above. "That $500 is as good as mine." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "I do not know what you are talking about. My name is Sarah Hensley. I work at the boarding house on 4th Street. The second man, shorter and thick around the middle, pulled a crumpled paper from his coat pocket and thrust it inches from her nose. The wanted poster showed a woman's face rendered in crude ink lines, features close enough to Sarah's own that her stomach dropped. Dark hair, wide-set eyes, a straight nose. But the name beneath read Susan Hartwell, and listed crimes Sarah had never committed in places she had never been. "Says here Susan Hartwell robbed a bank in Tucson and shot a clerk," the thick man said, voice carrying the self-satisfied tone of someone who believed himself clever. "That is you, sure as I am standing here." "That is not me. I have lived in Tombstone for 8 months. Ask anyone at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. Ask the Reverend. I have never even been to Tucson." Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, but fear crept in around the edges. These were bounty men, not lawmen, despite the badge the tall one wore. They would not care about truth or proof. They cared only about collecting reward money, and dead or alive meant the latter was simpler. The third man, younger than the other two with a face pocked by old scars, reached for her arm. "We will let the authorities sort it out in Tucson, after we collect our money, of course." "I believe the lady said you have the wrong person." The voice came from deeper in the alley, where the shadows pooled thick between stacked crates and a broken wagon wheel. All three bounty men spun toward the sound, hands dropping to the revolvers at their hips. Sarah pressed her back harder against the wall, pulse racing. A figure emerged from the darkness with the careful, measured pace of a man who had walked into trouble before and expected to walk out again. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness around his eyes. Dust coated his black hat and dark coat. When he lifted his head, those eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and cold and utterly calm. He touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers, the gesture almost courteous. "Gentlemen, this is none of your concern, friend," the tall bounty man said, though his hand stayed near his gun. "Move along." "I would, except you are blocking the alley and I need to pass." The stranger's voice held no threat, no anger, just a flat statement of fact that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting would have been. "Also, that woman is not Susan Hartwell." The thick bounty man spat into the dirt. "And how would you know that?" "Because Susan Hartwell is dead. Died of fever in a Yuma jail 2 weeks ago. I know because I was there collecting a different bounty when they buried her in the prison yard." The stranger moved closer, each step deliberate. "Which means that poster you are holding is worthless, and you are harassing an innocent woman." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, though whether it was relief or simply a different flavor of fear, she could not say. The bounty men looked at each other, uncertainty flickering across their faces. The tall one recovered first, jaw tightening. "I do not believe you. You are probably after the reward yourself. Then ride to Yuma and check. It is only a few days. The prison warden will confirm it." The stranger stopped about 10 feet away, close enough that Sarah could see the scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline, old and white against his tanned skin. "Or you can let the lady go about her business, and we can all walk away from this." The young, pockmarked man shifted his weight, fingers twitching. "There are 3 of us and 1 of you. I noticed that." The stranger tilted his head slightly, and something in the movement made Sarah think of a wolf considering its options. "But you should know that if anyone draws, I will shoot you first because you are the most nervous, then your friend with the badge because he is standing closest to the lady, and then the big fellow because he is too slow to matter. After that, I expect we will all have a very bad afternoon." The silence that followed felt thick enough to cut. Sarah could hear her own breathing, quick and shallow. She could hear the distant sounds of Tombstone's main street, horses and voices and the ring of a blacksmith's hammer. She could hear absolutely nothing from the 4 men facing each other in the dimness of the alley. The tall Bountyman was the first to move, but it was his hand coming away from his gun, not toward it. He made a show of adjusting his vest. "The reward is not worth getting killed over a maybe. We will check in Yuma like you said. Wise choice." The 3 men filed past the stranger, giving him a wide berth, and disappeared into the afternoon sunlight at the alley's mouth. Their boots echoed away down the boardwalk beyond. Sarah sagged against the wall, legs suddenly unsteady. The stranger watched until the footsteps faded completely, then turned to face her. "Are you hurt, miss?" Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. She bent to gather the scattered mending, fingers clumsy with leftover fear. The stranger crouched and helped her collect the linens, handing them to her one by one. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, the hands of someone who worked hard and often. "Thank you," she managed finally. "I thought they were going to drag me to Tucson or worse. They might have." He stood and offered his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm but careful. "Vincent Otwell. Sarah Hensley. Pleased to meet you, Miss Hensley, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He released her hand and stepped back, putting a polite distance between them. "You should be careful walking alone until those men leave town. Bounty hunters with empty pockets can be unpredictable." "I will. Thank you again, Mr. Otwell." Sarah clutched her basket to her chest, acutely aware that her hands were shaking. "What you said about Susan Hartwell, was that true? Or were you simply trying to frighten them off?" Something flickered in those pale eyes, too quick to read. "It was true. I saw them bury her myself." "Oh." Sarah did not know what else to say. A woman was dead, and somehow that death had just saved her life. "That is fortunate for me, I suppose, unfortunate for her." "Yes." Vincent touched his hat brim again, that same polite gesture. "Good day, miss." He turned and walked back the way he had come, disappearing into the shadows at the far end of the alley where it opened onto a side street. Sarah stood alone with her basket of mending, heart still racing, and wondered who Vincent Otwell was, and why a man like that had been standing in the shadows behind the assay office at exactly the right moment. She picked up her skirts and hurried back to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, glancing over her shoulder twice before she made it to the front door. That evening, Sarah sat in the kitchen helping Mrs. Patterson prepare supper for the boarders. The older woman moved between the stove and the table with the efficiency of long practice, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun that never seemed to come loose no matter how hot the kitchen became. "You are quiet tonight, dear, Mrs. Patterson observed, dumping a pot of boiled potatoes into a serving bowl. "Something on your mind?" Sarah hesitated, then told her about the alley, the Bountymen, and the stranger who had intervened. Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting, but her face grew increasingly troubled. Vincent Otwell, she repeated when Sarah finished. I have heard that name. He stays at the hotel sometimes, though not regularly. People say he is a bounty hunter himself, or was. Came out to the territory a few years back from somewhere east, Missouri maybe, or Kansas. He seemed. Sarah paused, searching for the right word. Sad? No, not sad exactly. Distant. Well, it is a hard profession. Mrs. Patterson began slicing bread with brisk, even strokes. Hard men make their living at it. You were fortunate he was there, but I would not give it more thought than that. Men like that do not stay in one place long. Sarah nodded, though her mind kept circling back to the moment Vincent had stepped from the shadows, calm and certain, and changed everything. She carried the potatoes into the dining room where 6 boarders were already gathering for the evening meal. The conversation turned to mine claims and silver prices, and whether the new marshal would be any better than the last one. Sarah listened with half an ear, serving and clearing plates, and told herself Mrs. Patterson was right. It was a chance encounter, nothing more. But 2 days later, Vincent Otwell walked into the boarding house dining room at breakfast time and took a seat at the corner table. Sarah nearly dropped the coffee pot. Vincent looked up, recognized her, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. He ordered eggs and bacon and toast, speaking quietly, and accepted the food with a polite thank you that sounded rusty from disuse. He ate alone, methodically, paying attention to his plate rather than the other diners. When he finished, he left coins on the table and departed without lingering. Well, Mrs. Patterson said from beside Sarah, making her jump. I suppose he is staying in town for a while after all. Vincent came back the next morning and the next. He always took the same corner table where his back was to the wall, and he could see both the front door and the kitchen entrance. He always ordered the same breakfast. He always ate alone. Sarah served him coffee and food and tried not to stare, but she found herself noticing details. The way he held his fork left-handed. The faint lines around his eyes that suggested he was older than she had first thought, perhaps closer to 35. The careful way he moved, as if some old injury still pained him. On the 5th morning, as she refilled his coffee, Vincent looked up and spoke. How have you been, Miss Hensley? Any more trouble with bounty hunters? No, thank goodness. I think they left town. Sarah hesitated, then asked, Have you been staying in Tombstone all this time? I have business here. He did not elaborate, and something in his tone suggested he would not appreciate further questions. Sarah nodded and moved to the next table. But the next morning, Vincent asked if the weather was always this dry in summer, and she found herself explaining the patterns of the Arizona Territory seasons. The morning after that, he commented on the bread, and she told him Mrs. Patterson baked it fresh every other day. Small conversations, carefully polite, that felt like testing the ice on a winter pond. 2 weeks after the incident in the alley, Sarah was walking back from the general store with a parcel of thread when she heard raised voices from the side street ahead. She recognized one voice immediately and her stomach clenched. The tall bounty hunter. I do not care what you heard about Yuma, he was saying, anger thick in every word. That woman is Susan Hartwell, and I am going to prove it. Sarah froze, then ducked into the recessed doorway of a closed shop. She could not see who the bounty hunter was talking to, but the response came in a rumble too low to make out words. The bounty hunter's voice rose higher. You lied to protect her. I checked the Yuma records. Susan Hartwell is not dead. She escaped 6 months ago, and that boarding house girl matches the description perfectly. Sarah's heart sank. She pressed herself flatter against the door, mind racing. If the bounty hunter was right, if Susan Hartwell was still alive, then the resemblance would condemn her all over again. How could she prove she was not someone else? She had no papers, no documents that established her identity beyond a few letters from an aunt in California and the word of people who had known her only a few months. You are mistaken. The second voice resolved into words, and Sarah realized it was Vincent. I told you the truth. Then you were lied to. Either way, I am bringing that girl in. Footsteps approached the corner, boots striking hard against the boardwalk. And if you get in my way again, bounty hunter, I will go through you. Sarah waited until the footsteps faded in the opposite direction, then emerged from the doorway on shaking legs. She made it 3 steps before Vincent appeared from around the corner. His expression was grim. You heard that? Yes, Sarah swallowed hard. He said Susan Hartwell escaped from Yuma 6 months ago, that you lied. I did not lie. I was told she died of fever, but if she escaped. Vincent trailed off, jaw tight. This is a problem. I have to prove I am not her. Desperation made Sarah's voice crack. But how? I have nothing that proves who I am. No birth certificate, no marriage papers, no legal documents at all. Just letters from my aunt, and those only have my first name. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those pale, unreadable eyes. Then he said, Where did you live before Tombstone? Sacramento, California. I came here 8 months ago to work and save money. My aunt raised me after my parents died when I was 12. She still lives in Sacramento on J Street, but I do not remember the number. What was your work there? I sewed for a dressmaker, Miss Chen's shop on 7th Street. Before that, I worked in a laundry. Sarah felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes and fought them back. But that does not help me here. It would take weeks to get confirmation from California, and that bounty hunter is not going to wait weeks. Vincent seemed to reach a decision. Come with me. He led her 3 blocks to a small office with a hand-painted sign that read B. Harrington, attorney at law. The man inside was perhaps 50, with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. Vincent explained the situation in his usual economical way while the lawyer listened, expression growing increasingly interested. So you need to establish identity and disprove a warrant accusation, Harrington said when Vincent finished. That is unusual but not impossible. We can request a formal hearing before the territorial judge. If we can demonstrate that Miss Hensley has been in Tombstone during times when Susan Hartwell was confirmed to be elsewhere, that would establish they are different people. How long would that take? Sarah asked. A few weeks to gather evidence and schedule the hearing. In the meantime, you should be careful. That bounty hunter cannot legally detain you without involving the marshal, but careful is still wise. Vincent paid the lawyer's retainer fee before Sarah could object. When they left the office, she turned on him, embarrassed and confused. I cannot let you pay for that. I will find a way to repay you, but it might take time. Do not worry about it. Vincent started walking back toward the boarding house, and Sarah hurried to keep pace. Why are you helping me? You do not know me. This is not your problem. Vincent stopped walking. For a moment, Sarah thought he would not answer, but then he said quietly, I know what it is like to be accused of something you did not do. I know what it is like when nobody will listen. He met her eyes, and for just an instant, the careful blankness cracked and she saw old pain underneath. Consider it a kindness paid forward. Before Sarah could respond, he touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving her standing on the boardwalk with threads she no longer remembered buying clutched in her hands. The next week unfolded in a strange sort of waiting. Sarah continued her work at the boarding house, conscious of the tall bounty hunter's presence in town. She saw him twice, watching from across the street, but he made no move to approach her. Vincent continued to appear for breakfast each morning. and the lawyer, Harrington, sent word that he was drafting the necessary legal documents for the hearing. Sarah found herself watching Vincent more closely, trying to understand the man who had inserted himself into her troubles without explanation. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained an invisible barrier that discouraged personal questions. He never mentioned family, never talked about his past, never stayed for more than the length of a meal. When other diners tried to strike up conversations, he answered in monosyllables until they gave up. But sometimes, Sarah caught him watching her when he thought she was not looking, and the expression on his face was complicated in ways she could not parse. On a Thursday morning, as she refilled his coffee for the third time, Sarah decided to push. "Mr. Otwell, may I ask you something?" He glanced up, wary. "You can ask. Why did you really come to Tombstone? You said you had business, but you have been here nearly 3 weeks now, and you do not seem to be conducting any business at all." Vincent set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. For a moment Sarah thought he would tell her it was none of her concern, but then he said, "I was tracking someone. A man named Jim Carver, wanted for murder in New Mexico, lost his trail outside of Tombstone and decided to wait and see if he passed through. And has he? No." Something shifted in Vincent's expression, a fleeting vulnerability. "I am beginning to think he never will. Probably went south into Mexico, which means I wasted 6 weeks chasing a cold trail." "Is that what you do? Track wanted men?" "It is what I did. I am not certain what I do anymore." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised Sarah. He stood abruptly, dropping coins on the table. "Excuse me." He left before Sarah could respond, the door swinging shut behind him with more force than necessary. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow, wiping her hands on her apron. "You are poking at something painful there, dear." "I did not mean to." Sarah stared at the door, confused and oddly hurt. "I was just curious." "Curiosity is natural, but that man is carrying a heavy burden. You can see it in the way he holds himself. Whatever happened to him, it was bad enough that he has been running from it for a long time." Mrs. Patterson patted her shoulder. "Be patient with him if you plan to keep trying." Sarah was not sure she planned anything of the sort, but she found her thoughts circling back to Vincent Otwell throughout the day. That evening, as she was closing the shutters in the dining room, she saw him through the window. He stood across the street in the gathering dusk, just outside the pool of lamplight, watching the boarding house with an expression so bleak it made her chest ache. She went to bed thinking about loneliness, and about the careful distance Vincent maintained between himself and everyone around him, and about what it must cost a person to live like that. The summons for the hearing arrived 5 days later. Judge Crawford would see them the following Monday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Sarah felt sick with nerves all through breakfast service, barely tasting the toast Mrs. Patterson insisted she eat. Vincent arrived just after 9, earlier than his usual time, and beckoned her over to his table. "Harrington sent word about the hearing. I will be there with you." "You do not have to do that, I know." He looked at her steadily. "I will be there anyway." That was when Sarah realized with a sudden clarity that stole her breath that she wanted him there. Not just for the help he could provide, but because Vincent Otwell had become important to her in a way she had not quite noticed happening. She wanted him there because his presence made her feel safer. She wanted him there because she had started to care what happened to him, this damaged, distant man who pushed everyone away except, somehow, her. "Thank you," she said softly, and saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been surprise. Monday arrived too quickly and too slowly both. Sarah wore her best dress, dark blue calico with a white collar, and braided her hair with hands that refused to stay steady. Vincent met her outside the courthouse at 1:30, wearing a clean shirt and dark vest that made him look almost respectable, despite the gun belt at his waist. Harrington arrived moments later, carrying a leather satchel stuffed with papers. "I have gathered affidavits from Mrs. Patterson and 3 other residents of the boarding house confirming your presence in Tombstone over the past 8 months," he told Sarah as they climbed the courthouse steps. "I also obtained records from the marshal's office in Yuma detailing Susan Hartwell's crimes and escape. The dates do not align with your residency here, which should be enough to establish you are not the same person." The courtroom was smaller than Sarah expected, with wooden benches and a raised platform where Judge Crawford presided. The judge was perhaps 60, with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. The tall bounty hunter sat in the front row with his 2 companions, all 3 looking disgruntled. The hearing began with Harrington presenting his evidence. He called Mrs. Patterson to testify first. She confirmed that Sarah had been living at her boarding house since late September of the previous year and working there in exchange for room and board. She described Sarah as reliable, honest, and helpful. The Bountymen's lawyer, a thin man with a reedy voice, tried to suggest that Mrs. Patterson might be mistaken about the dates, but she shut him down with the kind of precision only an experienced landlady could muster. 2 more boarders testified to the same effect. Then Harrington introduced the Yuma prison records, which showed Susan Hartwell had escaped in January, 4 months after Sarah arrived in Tombstone. The timeline made it impossible for them to be the same person, unless Sarah could be in 2 places at once. The Bountymen's lawyer called the tall bounty hunter to testify. He insisted that Sarah matched the description on the wanted poster, and that the timing could be explained if Sarah had simply been using a false name in Tombstone while committing crimes elsewhere. "You have any evidence that Miss Hensley has left Tombstone at any point in the past 8 months?" Judge Crawford asked, peering over his spectacles. The bounty hunter shifted uncomfortably. "No, Your Honor, but she could have." "Could have is not evidence, sir. Do you have anything concrete to support your accusation? The physical resemblance is very strong." "Physical resemblance is also not evidence of criminal activity." The judge looked at the wanted poster, then at Sarah, then back at the poster. "I see a generic similarity, but nothing that would compel me to ignore the timeline established by multiple witnesses." The Bountymen's lawyer tried to argue further, but Judge Crawford cut him off with an impatient gesture. He reviewed the papers before him for several long minutes while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up. "I find that the evidence clearly establishes Miss Sarah Hensley as a resident of Tombstone during the entire period in question, and furthermore demonstrates that Susan Hartwell was incarcerated in Yuma during much of that same period. The physical resemblance between the 2 women is insufficient to overcome the documented timeline. The accusation is dismissed, and these bounty hunters are forbidden from harassing Miss Hensley further on this matter. If they do, they will be held in contempt of this court." He banged his gavel. "We are adjourned." Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely she felt dizzy. Harrington shook her hand, beaming. Mrs. Patterson, who had waited in the gallery, hurried forward to embrace her. Vincent stood back, watching, and when Sarah caught his eye, he gave her a small nod that somehow meant more than all the congratulations combined. Outside the courthouse, as the afternoon sun turned the dusty street gold, Sarah finally found herself alone with Vincent. Harrington had departed to file the official paperwork, Mrs. Patterson had returned to prepare supper, and the bounty hunters had ridden out of town in disgust. "I do not know how to thank you," Sarah said. "You saved my life twice now, 3 times if you count paying for the lawyer." Vincent looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. You would have been fine. Harrington did all the real work. Harrington would not have been involved if you had not brought me to him, and you were the one who scared off the bounty hunters in the first place." Sarah took a breath, steadying herself. "Why, Vincent? Why did you do all this for a stranger?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough-edged. "5 years ago, I had a wife and a daughter. We lived in Kansas, on a small farm outside of Abilene. I was working as a deputy marshal then, doing honest work, trying to build a good life." He paused, jaw working. "3 men came through hunting a fugitive who had passed by our farm weeks earlier. They did not believe me when I said I did not know where the man had gone. They thought I was hiding him. My wife tried to explain, tried to reason with them, and they—" He stopped, the words seizing in his throat. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. "Vincent, you do not have to tell me this. They killed her. Killed my daughter too, who was only 4 years old. Shot them both while I was in town fetching supplies." He stared at something far away, something only he could see. "By the time I got home, the bounty hunters were gone and my family was dead on the kitchen floor. The law said it was a tragedy, an accident, that the bounty hunters had been within their rights to question potential witnesses. No charges were ever filed." "Oh, Vincent!" Sarah did not think, just reached out and took his hand. To her surprise, he did not pull away. "I spent 2 years tracking those men down. Found them all, turned them in for other crimes I dug up, made sure they ended up in prison or worse. Then I did not know what to do with myself. I had spent so long focused on revenge that I forgot how to be anything else. So I became a bounty hunter myself, told myself I was different from them, that I only went after guilty people, that I was doing something good." He looked down at their joined hands as if surprised to find them there. "But the truth is, I was just running. Running from memories, running from grief, running from the fact that my family is gone and I could not save them. That was not your fault. I know that here." He touched his head with his free hand. "But I do not know it here." He touched his chest over his heart. "When I saw those bounty hunters cornering you in that alley, all I could think about was my wife trying to reason with men who did not care about reason. I thought about my daughter, and about all the ways violence becomes normal when money is involved, and I could not walk away. I could not let it happen again." Sarah tightened her grip on his hand. "You saved me. You gave me a chance to prove my innocence. That is not nothing, Vincent. That is everything. Maybe." He met her eyes, and the bleakness there was raw enough to hurt, but it does not bring them back. Nothing brings them back. They stood together in the dusty street while the town moved around them, 2 people connected by chance and tragedy and something else, something fragile and new that neither of them quite knew how to name. Finally, Vincent gently extracted his hand. "I should go." "Where?" He gestured vaguely toward the horizon. "Somewhere. I have been in Tombstone too long. Time to move on." Panic fluttered in Sarah's chest. "You are leaving?" "That is what I do. I move from place to place, chase bounties, collect money, keep moving. Staying in one place too long makes things complicated." "Complicated how?" Sarah knew she was pushing, knew she had no right to ask, but she could not stop herself. "Because you might start to care about people again. Because you might build a life instead of running from the one you lost." Vincent's expression shuddered closed. "You do not understand. Then explain it to me." "I cannot." He took a step back, putting physical distance between them. "Thank you for the breakfasts, Miss Hensley. I am glad you are safe now." He walked away, and Sarah let him go, because what else could she do? She could not force him to stay. She could not make him see that isolating himself forever was just another way of dying. But that did not stop her heart from breaking a little as she watched him disappear down the street. Vincent did not come to breakfast the next morning or the morning after that. Sarah told herself it did not matter, that he was just a man who had helped her and moved on, the way drifters did. She threw herself into her work, scrubbing floors and washing linens and helping Mrs. Patterson prepare meals for the boarders. She smiled when she was supposed to smile and made polite conversation when required, and tried very hard not to think about pale eyes and careful hands, and a grief so deep it had swallowed a man whole. On the third day, Mrs. Patterson found her crying into a pile of mending in the kitchen and made her sit down with a cup of tea. "Tell me what is wrong, dear." "Nothing is wrong. I am being foolish." Sarah wiped at her eyes, embarrassed. "I barely know him. We only spoke a handful of times. I have no claim on him and no right to be upset that he left." "Feelings do not work on rights and claims," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "They just work, whether we want them to or not. I care about him." The admission felt like pulling a splinter from deep beneath the skin, painful and necessary. "I know it is ridiculous. I know he is a stranger, but I care about him and I want him to be happy, and I do not think he knows how to be happy anymore." "Have you told him this?" Sarah shook her head. "He would not want to hear it. He is determined to keep everyone at a distance." "Perhaps. Or perhaps he is just afraid." Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone know they matter, even if they push us away." The words stayed with Sarah as she finished her work and climbed the stairs to her small room under the eaves. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about bravery and fear and what it meant to reach for something that might slip through your fingers. The next morning, she made a decision. Vincent's hotel was 2 blocks from the boarding house, a narrow building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. Sarah had never been inside, had no idea which room was his, but the clerk at the front desk recognized her description and pointed toward the stairs. "Room 8, 2nd floor. Though I do not know if he is in. Keeps odd hours, that one." Sarah climbed the stairs with her heart hammering. She knocked on the door of room 8, half hoping he would not answer. But after a moment she heard footsteps, and then the door opened to reveal Vincent in shirt sleeves, hair disheveled, looking like he had not slept in days. "Sarah." Surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by wariness. "What are you doing here? I came to tell you something." She lifted her chin, gathering courage. "You were right. Staying in one place does make things complicated. Caring about people makes things complicated. But complicated is not the same as bad, Vincent. Complicated can also be good." "Sarah, do not. Let me finish." She pressed forward before she could lose her nerve. "You saved my life, and you told me about your family, and you shared something important and painful, and then you walked away like none of it mattered. But it did matter. It does matter. You matter to me, even though I have only known you a few weeks. And I think maybe I matter to you too, which is why you are hiding in this hotel room instead of leaving town like you said you would." Vincent stared at her, something warring behind his eyes. "You do not know what you are asking." "I am not asking for anything. I am just telling you the truth. I care about you. I want you to stay, but not because you feel obligated or guilty. I want you to stay because you want to be here. Because maybe, eventually, you could care about me too." The silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. Then Vincent stepped back from the door, his shoulders sagging. "I do care about you. That is the problem." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I cared about my family and I lost them. I cared about justice and discovered it was a lie. I cared about doing the right thing and it still was not enough. Caring has only ever brought me pain, Sarah. I do not know if I can survive more of it." "So you plan to live alone forever? To never let anyone close because they might get hurt, or you might get hurt, or something might go wrong?" Sarah took a step into the room, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion written in every line of his face. "That is not living, Vincent. That is just waiting to die. Maybe that is all I deserve. That is not true." She reached up and placed her palm against his cheek, feeling the rough stubble there, the warmth of his skin. "You deserve peace. You deserve happiness. You deserve a chance to heal instead of carrying this grief around like a penance forever." Vincent's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face, his eyes closed. "I do not know how to stop. Then let me help you figure it out." Sarah's voice shook, but she kept going. "I am not asking for promises or grand gestures. I am just asking you to stay. Give Tombstone a chance. Give us a chance. See what happens when you stop running." For a long moment, Vincent did not move. Then, very slowly, he opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time, or maybe like he was letting himself see her for the first time. "I am afraid," he said quietly. "I know. I am afraid too." Sarah managed a shaky smile, but "I think being afraid together is better than being afraid alone." Vincent let out a breath that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Sarah wrapped her arms around him and held on just as tightly, feeling the way he trembled against her, feeling the way years of locked-away grief finally found a crack in his armor. They stood like that for a long time, in the shabby hotel room with its faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole. Vincent did not leave town. He moved out of the hotel and took a room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, which Sarah suspected the older woman arranged on purpose by suddenly having a vacancy. He showed up for breakfast each morning, but now he stayed for conversation afterward, helping carry dishes to the kitchen or walking with Sarah to the market when she had errands to run. The careful distance remained, but it was thinner now, less impenetrable, shot through with moments of genuine warmth. Sarah learned things about him in pieces. He had grown up in Missouri, the son of farmers. He liked his coffee black and his eggs fried hard. He read newspapers from cover to cover, absorbing information with a focus that suggested old habits from his lawman days. He played the harmonica, though he only did it when he thought no one was listening, soft, melancholy tunes that drifted up from the porch in the evenings. She learned that he was funny when he allowed himself to be, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. She learned that he was patient, the kind of person who could spend an hour fixing a broken chair leg and never seem frustrated. She learned that he carried guilt like a physical weight, and that sometimes, late at night when he thought everyone was asleep, she could hear him pacing in his room above hers. But she also learned that he smiled more when she was around, that he sought out her company without quite admitting that was what he was doing, that sometimes, when she laughed, he would look at her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. September faded into October. The heat broke, and Tombstone settled into the mild warmth of a desert autumn. Sarah and Vincent fell into a rhythm that felt almost like courting, though neither of them called it that. He walked her home from church on Sundays. She mended his shirts when they needed it. They sat together on the boarding house porch in the evenings, talking about small things and large ones, building trust one conversation at a time. "Tell me about your family," Vincent said one evening as they watched the sun set over the Dragoon Mountains in the distance. Sarah had been expecting this question eventually. She tucked her feet under her skirts, thinking, "My parents died of typhoid when I was 12. My mother's sister, Aunt Margaret, took me in. She was good to me, but she was also stern, practical. She did not believe in coddling or sentiment. She taught me to sew and to cook and to keep house, and when I turned 18, she told me I should go make my own way in the world because she had done her duty by me." Sarah smiled faintly. It sounds harsh, but she was not wrong. I needed to learn to stand on my own. Is that why you came to Arizona? Partly. Mostly I wanted adventure, or at least a change. Sacramento was so crowded and busy. I thought somewhere like Tombstone would be different, she laughed. It certainly was. Do you miss California? Sometimes. I miss my aunt, even though she is prickly as a cactus, but I do not regret coming here. She glanced at him. Especially not now. Vincent met her eyes and something passed between them, warm and significant. He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that until the stars came out, not talking, just being together. In November, a telegram arrived from California. Sarah's aunt had fallen ill. Not seriously, the message assured her, but it would be good if Sarah could visit. The train fare would strain her savings, but family was family. She told Mrs. Patterson she needed 2 weeks away and began packing. Vincent found her in her room, folding clothes into a battered carpet bag. You are going to Sacramento, just for a visit. My aunt is sick. Sarah tried to keep her voice light, but the thought of leaving, even temporarily, made her anxious in ways she had not anticipated. I will be back before Thanksgiving. I could go with you. Sarah's hand stilled on a folded blouse. You want to come to California? I want to make sure you get there safely. Vincent shifted his weight, looking uncertain. And I want to meet your aunt if that is acceptable. Why? The question came out softer than Sarah intended. Vincent stepped into the room and took the blouse from her hands, setting it aside so he could hold both her hands in his. Because you are important to me. Because I have been running for 5 years and I am tired of it. Because when I think about the future now, I see you in it and that terrifies me, but I want it anyway. Sarah's heart felt too large for her chest. Vincent Otwell, are you courting me? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his whole face. I am trying to. I am not sure I remember how. You are doing fine. She squeezed his hands. And yes, you can come to California with me. I think Aunt Margaret will like you. Or at least respect you. With her, those are the same thing. They traveled west by stage and then by train, the landscape changing from desert scrub to grassland to the green hills of California. Vincent was quiet during the journey, but he stayed close, a steady presence at her shoulder. When they reached Sacramento, Sarah led him through streets that felt both familiar and strange after months away, until they reached her aunt's narrow house on J Street. Aunt Margaret answered the door herself, looking thinner than Sarah remembered, but otherwise unchanged. She studied Vincent with sharp eyes that missed nothing. So you brought a man home. This is Vincent Otwell. He is a friend. Sarah faltered over the inadequate word. More than a friend, actually. Good. Friends do not travel across 3 territories together. Come in, both of you. The neighbors are watching. Aunt Margaret stepped aside to let them enter. The house smelled like lavender and old wood, exactly the way Sarah remembered. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah watched Vincent win over her skeptical aunt through sheer quiet competence. He repaired the loose boards on the porch without being asked. He split firewood and carried water and made himself useful in a dozen small ways. At dinner, he answered Aunt Margaret's probing questions with honesty, telling her about his past, his family, his years as a drifter. He did not hide the hard parts or try to make himself seem better than he was. You have had a rough time of it, Aunt Margaret said after one such conversation. Yes, madam, and you care about my niece. Very much. Aunt Margaret looked at Sarah, then back at Vincent. Good. She deserves someone who will stand by her, someone steady. You seem like you could be steady if you set your mind to it. I am trying to be. On their last evening in Sacramento, Aunt Margaret pulled Sarah aside in the kitchen. That man loves you. I hope you realize that." Sarah's face heated. He has not said so. He does not have to. It is written all over him every time he looks at you. Aunt Margaret crossed her arms, her expression softening slightly. "You could do worse. He is honest and he works hard and he cares about you more than his own comfort. Those are good qualities in a husband." "Husband," Sarah's voice came out strangled, "we have not talked about marriage." "Then you should. You are both adults, not children. If you are serious about each other, make it official. If you are not, stop wasting each other's time." Aunt Margaret patted her cheek, uncharacteristically gentle. "I raised you to be practical, Sarah. Be practical now." Sarah thought about that conversation all the way back to Arizona. She thought about futures and possibilities, and the way Vincent had stopped flinching every time someone got too close. She thought about mornings at the boarding house and evenings on the porch, and the slow, careful way they had built something real out of grief and chance. The week before Christmas, Vincent took her to dinner at the best restaurant Tombstone had to offer, which was a relative term but still felt special. They ate steak and potatoes by lamplight while a piano player worked through a repertoire of slightly out-of-tune carols. Afterward, Vincent walked her back to the boarding house through streets decorated with pine boughs and ribbon. At the front door, he stopped and turned to face her. His expression was nervous, which was so unlike him that Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "I need to ask you something." "All right." Vincent reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a single small diamond. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to me years ago, said I should have it when I found the right person. I thought I would never use it after everything that happened. But then I met you and you made me want to try again. You made me want to live instead of just exist." He took a shaky breath. "Sarah Hensley, will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes blurred with tears. She thought about the man who had stepped from the shadows in an alley and changed her life. She thought about grief and healing and the courage it took to reach for happiness after loss. She thought about the future she wanted and the man she wanted to build it with. "Yes," she said, and watched Vincent's whole face transform with relief and joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all this time to find her. They were married in February, a simple ceremony at the Tombstone courthouse with Mrs. Patterson and lawyer Harrington as witnesses. Sarah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she sewed herself, and Vincent wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and uncomfortable. Judge Crawford performed the ceremony, smiling the whole time, and pronounced them husband and wife with evident satisfaction. That night, in the small house they had rented on the edge of town, Vincent held Sarah close and told her he loved her for the first time, the words quiet but certain. Sarah said them back and felt something settle into place inside her, like a piece of herself she had not known was missing had finally come home. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Vincent stopped bounty hunting and took a job as a deputy with the county sheriff, using his skills to help rather than chase. Sarah continued sewing, taking in work from families across Tombstone, building a small business of her own. They saved money and made plans and talked about the future in a way that felt real and possible. Their first child, a son they named Josiah, was born in the winter of 1883. He had Sarah's dark hair and Vincent's pale eyes and a temperament that was sunny from the start. Vincent cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with a tangle of emotions too complicated to name. Sarah watched him cradle the tiny baby with infinite care and knew that he was finally, truly healing. Their daughter Mabel arrived 2 years later, fierce and funny and loud. Then Clara, 3 years after that, quiet and thoughtful and wise beyond her years. The small house grew crowded and chaotic and full of the kind of noise that came from love and life, and too many people in too small a space. It was everything Vincent had thought he would never have again, and sometimes Sarah would catch him watching the children with an expression of wonder, like he could not quite believe they were real. In 1889, an opportunity arose that changed everything again. A way station halfway between Tombstone and Tucson was for sale, a sprawling adobe building with a well and corrals and enough land to run a profitable business. The owners were retiring, moving back east, and they needed someone to take over. "We could do it," Sarah said one evening as they sat on their porch watching Josiah and Mabel chase fireflies in the yard. Clara slept in Vincent's arms, her small face peaceful. "Run the way station, I mean. Offer food and lodging to travelers. It would be good, steady work." Vincent looked at her, considering. "It would be hard work. We are not afraid of hard work." "No, we are not," he smiled, the expression coming easier now after years of practice. "The children would like it. Open space, animals, travelers with stories. It would be good for them." "It would be good for us, too." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. "A place that is really ours, a place where we can build something lasting." They bought the way station in the spring, selling the house in Tombstone and moving their family out to the desert road between towns. The work was hard, just as Vincent had predicted, but it was satisfying in ways that desk jobs and sewing never quite had been. They fed travelers and tended horses and offered shelter to people passing through. Vincent proved to have a knack for fixing broken wagons and calming skittish animals. Sarah discovered she loved cooking for crowds and swapping stories with strangers. The children thrived. Josiah, at 6, took to ranch life like he had been born to it, helping with the horses and learning to rope from passing cowboys. Mabel, fierce and independent, declared herself in charge of the chickens and ruled her tiny flock with an iron fist. Clara, barely 2, toddled after everyone with determined cheer, the baby of the family and utterly beloved. Years passed in the rhythm of seasons and stages. The children grew taller, more capable, more themselves. Josiah became a steady presence, reliable and kind with his father's quietness and his mother's warm heart. Mabel grew into her fierceness, unafraid of anything, determined to see the world beyond the way station. Clara surprised everyone by being the scholar of the family, teaching herself to read at 4 and devouring every book that passed through the station. Vincent turned 40, then 45, the years sitting easier on him now. The lines around his eyes deepened, but they came from laughter as often as from old pain. He still had nightmares sometimes, still carried the scars of his first family's loss, but Sarah was there to hold him through the hard nights. They had learned to be each other's strength, to carry grief together when it came, to build joy out of ordinary moments. On a warm evening in the summer of 1897, Sarah sat on the porch of the way station watching the sun set over the desert. The sky burned orange and pink and gold, the colors so vivid they seemed unreal. From inside came the sounds of her family, Vincent's deep voice explaining something to Josiah, Mabel's laugh, Clara reading aloud from a book of poetry. A stage was due in an hour, and there was supper to prepare, but for now Sarah just sat and soaked in the peace of the moment. She thought about the woman she had been 16 years ago, cornered in an alley and terrified. She thought about the man who had stepped from the shadows and changed everything. She thought about all the moments between then and now, the hard ones and the beautiful ones, the way they had built a life together out of nothing but determination and love. Vincent came out and sat beside her, moving with the ease of long familiarity. He took her hand, the gesture automatic after so many years. What are you thinking about? Everything. Sarah squeezed his hand. How lucky we are, how different things could have been. Different how? If those bounty hunters had dragged me to Tucson, if you had not been in that alley, if you had left town before we could figure out what we meant to each other. She shook her head. 1,000 different choices could have led somewhere else, but they did not. Vincent lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a courtly gesture that still made her smile. They led here, to this, to us. Yes, Sarah leaned against him, content. They led home. Inside, Mabel called that supper was ready. Josiah yelled something about the horses needing water. Clara's voice rose in a dramatic reading that made them both smile. The sounds of their family, vibrant and real, the best thing either of them had ever built. Vincent stood and helped Sarah to her feet, and together they went inside to the noise and warmth and chaos of their life. The way station would see them through decades to come, sheltering travelers and building memories. Their children would grow and leave and come back again, bringing grandchildren eventually, filling the adobe rooms with new generations. But on that particular evening, with the desert painted gold and their family gathered close, Vincent and Sarah simply held hands and walked through the door, grateful for every chance and choice that had brought them here. The bounty hunters, the alley, the moment that began everything, it all felt like fate now, like the universe had been waiting for them to find each other. And perhaps it had been. Perhaps love was always like that, lurking in shadows and stepping out at exactly the right moment, tipping its hat and changing everything forever.